Hello friends, I am Sharad Vaze, practicing chartered accountant for more than 38 years and also handling disciplinary cases for about 17-18 years. Now, before we proceed for the next clause 9, I have received some queries in the previous clause 8, that is communication to the previous auditor. One professional has asked, do we require to communicate the auditorship or the communication to the previous auditor in case of stock audit, which is done on behalf of the bank? In a sense, the banks give advances on the basis of stocks held, inventories held, and regularly most of the banks appoint professionals for stock verification. This is also a kind of audit. The clause 8 requires communication to the previous auditor. Then one more question that has been raised is, do we require to have communication to the previous auditor if the previous auditor is not professionally qualified? What I mean to say, for instance, in the state of Maharashtra, cooperative audit is allowed to be conducted by certified auditors for certain persons who are empaneled with the Commissioner for Cooperation. So in fact, suppose for a particular year, say March 20, that certified auditor who is neither a chartered accountant or a cost accountant or a company secretary, that means not a professional at all per se, has done the audit of a small cooperative housing society having some 10-12 members. Now for 31st March 21, a chartered accountant is being appointed. Then does he require to communicate to the previous auditor who is not otherwise qualified? The institute's opinion is it will be an healthy practice to communicate to the previous auditor. In short, if not communicated, it will not amount to professional misconduct, but it will be preferable. One more question is asked, is it the previous auditor means immediately preceding year? Is it the intention? Unfortunately or fortunately, the answer is no. That means even in the immediately preceding year, there was no audit. As said, there was no auditor, but prior to that, there was an auditor. Then the clause 8 requires communication to the last auditor. To give an example, say for assessment year 18-19, in case of a proprietary concern or a partnership firm, a tax audit was performed. For assessment year 1920, there was no tax audit requirement. For assessment year 2021, there was no tax audit requirement. But for assessment year 21-22, the tax audit is required to be conducted. For 17-18, A has done the audit. For 21-22, B is going to do the audit. Then clause 8 requires communication from B incoming auditor to the A outgoing auditor, even though there was no audits for 2 intervening years. That means communication to the last auditor, we can say it. Now let us proceed to clause number 9. In very first lecture, I discussed the broad contents of schedules to the Chartered Accountants Act, Cost and Works Accountants Act, and Company Secretaries Act. It has got two schedules. Schedule 1 is with respect to certain not offenses but some negligence cases or misconduct cases. It has got Schedule 1 Part 1 applicable to practicing professional. Now at that time I also told that Schedule 1 Part 1 of Chartered Accountants Act, Cost and Works Accountants Act, and the Company Secretaries Act is 100% identical, with exception of only one clause additional under Chartered Accountants Act, and that is clause number 9. So clause number 9, which I am going to explain today, is applicable only to chartered accountants, because such clause number 9 does not appear, is not included in the Cost and Works Accountants Act as well as under the Company Secretaries Act 1980. Now what the clause 9 reads. Clause 9 reads like this. If a chartered accountant in practice shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he accepts an appointment as an auditor without first ascertaining from it whether the requirements of Section 225 of the Companies Act 1956 in respect of such appointments have been duly complied with. Obviously, Section 225 pertains to 1956 Act. It is to be modified to Section 139 and 140 of the Companies Act of 2013. Now, if an auditor accepts the appointment without ascertaining from it, from the company, whether the provisions of the Act has been complied with. Now, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in its Code of Ethics has stated to ascertain means to find out for certain. To ascertain means to find out for certain. That means the auditor should not only accept a certificate from the management or the company that the provisions of the Companies Act have been complied with. It will be insufficient. That is what the institute says. The auditor on his own should verify the records of the company, whether the proper resolution is passed by the board of directors in case of first appointment or for subsequent appointments, whether the proper resolutions have been passed by the general meeting, whether the information is given to the register of companies, whether the certain particular forms required to be filed in case of appointment of auditors is filed with the register of companies or not. That means all these procedural part have been complied by the management is to be ascertained by the incoming auditor actually, and he should not rely on the certificate from the management that these procedures have been complied with. If a company is not willing or is reluctant to give the necessary information or to verify the records, the institute has advised the auditor, incoming auditor, should not accept such appointment. That means it is for the incoming auditor to ascertain, that means to make sure for certain that the procedure as to the appointment is fully complied with. Now, when the appointment of auditor takes place, all of us are well aware, in case of a newly incorporated company, the appointment is to be made within 30 days of incorporation, but this is not applicable to government company. If the appointment is not made within 30 days, then within next 90 days, a company has to call for extraordinary general meeting, and in that case, an appointment of an auditor is required to be made. The subsequent appointments can be made by the company for 6 years, for 5 years, for a conclusion till the end of the annual general meeting at the end of the 5th year, and so on and so forth. Now, in short, when the institute requires a professional to ascertain whether the appointment is proper or not, the question of doctrine of indoor management comes into picture. Whether an auditor can raise a defense that I relied on the doctrine of principle of indoor management. That means when I received the appointment letter, I presume that the appointment is validly made may not hold good in case of disciplinary proceedings, because there is a specific requirement under the Chartered Accountants Act. The auditor must ensure that his appointment is validly made by the company. However, one more aspect of this clause is clause 9 is applicable only to appointments made by the companies only. Now, what about the other entities? For example, if appointment is made by a cooperative society or a charitable trust, whether such procedure is required by law to be followed, or appointment is made by the company for tax audit purposes or various audits that are required under the Income Tax Act, whether the procedure required under this clause 9 is required to be followed. In my opinion, the answer is negative, because clause 9 merely does not say that appointment as auditor of a company without ascertaining in whether the provisions of 225 of the Companies Act, that means the clause 9 refers to specific section, that is 225 of the Companies Act, parallel is 139 and 140 of the Companies Act of 2013, it does not generalize the auditor's responsibility to ascertain whether his appointment is validly made or not. That means in case of a cooperative society, the bylaws of the society may provide for appointment of an auditor in the annual general meeting, whereas the appointment is made by the managing committee of the housing society or any other cooperative society. The obviously auditor is not aware about the bylaws of the society, because bylaws of the society are for a specific society, for that particular society. It is not for generally published, or although it is published, it is not meant applicable to all the societies. Society can make changes in their own bylaws. So the auditor is not aware about may not be aware about the bylaws. In that case, if the management issues him a letter of appointment, in my opinion, he can proceed accepting the appointment without ensuring, or there is no need to ascertain whether his appointment is validly made or not. Similarly, in case of trust, in case of other entities, or in case of other types of audits. Now, the next clause number 10 is relatively simple. In a sense, it says a chartered accountant shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he charges or offers to charge, accepts or offers to accept in respect of any professional employment fees which are based on percentage of profits or which are contingent upon the findings or results of such employment, except as permitted under this regulation. In a sense, clause 10 strictly prohibits charging of fees by a professional based upon outcome. That means a chartered accountant, before that, this clause 10 applies to all the professionals, that is chartered accountants, cost accountants, and company secretaries also. Only clause 9 was applicable to chartered accountants. So for all these three professionals, if they charge fees based upon the outcome on the assignment, then it is strictly prohibited. In a sense, if a chartered accountant says that my fees are say 25,000, but if I win this appeal in a tribunal, my fees will be 50,000 rupees. That means his fees 25,000 are acceptable, there is no problem in that, but his additional fees of 25,000 for winning the case, that which is the contingent, he may win, he may not win, such situations it is strictly prohibited. His fees cannot be based upon the outcome or the result of his assignment. However, the clause provides except as permitted under regulations made under this act. For this, regulation 192 of Chartered Accountant Regulation provide that where fees are allowed to be based on outcome or the result, which are an exception. Exception number 1, which reads like, in case of a receiver or liquidator, fees may be based upon the percentage of realization or disbursement of asset. If a professional is acting as a liquidator, then his fees can be as a percentage of distribution to shareholders or distribution to secured creditors or distribution to creditors, whatever the case may be, or the fees can be dependent upon realization of assets. Second exception is fees can be, in case of a cooperative society, fees may be based upon as a percentage of paid up capital or a working capital. Now, for instance, in Maharashtra, the fees of urban cooperative banks are to be calculated with reference to working capital of that bank. In a sense, it is say 10 paise up to rupees 50, 10 crores, then 5 paise up to 10 crores, then 2 paise up to next 90 crores, and balance at 1 paise. Likewise, the fees are dependent upon it. On working capital, it is permitted. In case of valuers, the fees can be based upon the property valued. In case of fundraising services, which is a good one for most of us, the fees may be based upon the percentage of funds raised. Many professionals are taking the assignment of raising working capital or term loan syndication. In such cases, fees can be based upon as a percentage of funds raised. Then fees can be based upon cost optimization, in a sense the savings affected in cost. That means if I give some procedure or process whereby your 10 lakhs will be saved, my fees will be 10% of saving in cost, that is permissible. In case of insolvency professional, even fees can be based upon certain percentage. So these are the exceptions to the general rule that fees based upon outcome is strictly prohibited for any professional. Now that ends clause number 10 from Schedule 1, Part 1 to all the three statutes. I reiterate again that the notification for elections for chartered accountants have been notified. I state again that I do not intend to stand for any election whatsoever, nor this forum will be used for canvassing of any candidature. If you like this lecture, kindly forward it, like it, forward it, and subscribe it. Thank you very much.